Although I've talked about the story of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 in the past, today I want to do something a little bit different and shine a spotlight on this game's animatronic characters, the Nightmares. FNAF 4 changes the usual office setup of the previous games for a child's bedroom, and has you fending off your nightmares by shutting the doors on them and listening closely to make sure they're not in your room. The room is similar to the FNAF 1 office, but has you checking on a closet where Nightmare Foxy hides, and your bed that if left unwatched for long enough will summon Nightmare Freddy. Aside from being extremely scary, these things might hide some pretty crazy lore reveals under the surface that I'll be unveiling today, so remember to subscribe and let's get right into it. Before we discuss the actual lore relevance of these characters, we should first discuss who they actually are and what FNAF games they appear in apart from FNAF 4. The core Nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4's base game are Nightmare Freddy and his Freddles, Nightmare Bonnie, Nightmare Chica and her Cupcake, Nightmare Foxy, Nightmare Fredbear, Nightmare, and Plushtrap. The Halloween edition of the game contains new reskinned versions of the characters, with Jacko Bonnie and Jacko Chica replacing the normal Bonnie and Chica, Nightmare Foxy being replaced by Nightmare Mangle, and Nightmare being replaced by Nightmare Rayon, as well as Plushtrap becoming Nightmare Balloon Boy. I'll discuss the Halloween edition characters later, but for now I want to focus on the main Nightmare animatronics, their mechanics, and any lore they might reveal or the speculations around them. Nightmare Bonnie and Chica act just like their FNAF 1 counterparts, appearing from the left and the right hand sides of the room respectively. As I said earlier, Nightmare Foxy will enter your closet and progress through different phases, going from a plush to its animatronic form before jump scaring you if you don't watch him for long enough. Nightmare Freddy only appears if you let all of his free Freddles stay on your bed for long enough without using the flashlight on them, which will cause him to appear and instantly jump scare the player. Now, the last two of the core bunch of Nightmare animatronics are Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare, who replace the previous characters in later nights and pose a much larger threat. These two are the characters who I'll probably be talking the most about today. And then there's Plushtrap. Don't worry, I'll talk about him too. Plushtrap stars in his own minigame, Fun with Plushtrap, that you can play before every night. If you successfully manage to get Plushtrap stunned on the cross in the middle of the room using your flashlight, you get to skip 2 hours ahead on your next in-game night. Additionally, before I talk about the lore surrounding these characters, I want to explain where the nightmares come from, why they exist, and who's playing through FNAF 4. For a long time, Theorists believed that these characters were either actual nightmares being had by Crying Child before or after the Bite of 83, or a group of William Afton's creations powered by illusion discs, a piece of Afton Robotics tech from the books that utilizes sound waves to change an object or person's appearance. However, with the release of the last Tales from the Pizzaplex book, B72, it quickly became clear that neither of these theories was actually the case. In the story Ditophobia, a 7-year-old boy called Rory is trapped in his house, unable to find an exit, and ends up having the same nightmare about a bunch of terrifying robot animals hunting him down over and over again. One day he hears the sound of an engine failing and starts exploring the house. He soon realizes that this isn't actually his home. It's an experiment chamber filled to the brim of a nightmare-inducing gas that made him believe the things hunting after him were horrifying monstrosities, when they were actually just mannequins on rails, with the house containing the bare minimum of food and water necessary for him to survive. Eventually, he manages to use his old walkie-talkie to contact one of his childhood friends, who reveals Rory's been missing for 10 years after he ran away from home, meaning that he's 17, not 7 like he thought he was while in the experiment. As he explores, he finds an empty, high-tech underground bunker as well as some animatronic pieces, and eventually hears a soothing middle-aged man's voice telling him to turn the engine back on and that the experiment chamber is his home. Rory does so, and everything goes back to how it was, as the old tape recorder on the roof of the building clicks off. Take 1. This story made it extremely clear that this is what FNAF 4's gameplay is all about, some kind of experiment chamber. And this idea isn't new. In sister location, the Breaker Room map has the Circus Baby Entertainment and Rentals bunker directly connected to the FNAF 4 Nightmare rooms. As well as that, if you type in 1983 in the keypad on sister location's private room, you get camera footage of the FNAF 4 rooms. So we can conclude that the Nightmare animatronics were created by William for these experiment chambers, likely to create remnant or emotional energy for the fun times. But the gameplay of FNAF 4 doesn't actually take place in one of these chambers. It's actually much more likely FNAF 4 is a nightmare that Michael Afton's going through during or after the events of FNAF 1. I know it's kinda confusing, but it's possible Mike went through these chambers and is having nightmares about them years later, explaining why you can hear the FNAF 1 phone guy call in the background of the game, which is a sound Crying Child couldn't have heard, or why the gameplay is so similar to FNAF 1. The survival logbook, which we know is owned by Mike, also has multiple references to FNAF 4, most notably a drawing of Nightmare Fredbear made by Mike in the page asking for a recent dream. So now that we know the truth about the Nightmare animatronics' identities, what other lore are they hiding? The Nightmare versions of the core 4 members of the Freddy band don't have many ongoing theories revolving around them, except for Nightmare Freddy. Now, I don't think anyone else has brought this up, but Nightmare Freddy has 3 Freddles with him at all times, and they could represent the 3 Afton kids, Michael, Elizabeth, and Crying Child. Nightmare Freddy is also the only one of the core 4 Nightmares to appear in Ultimate Custom Night, Afton's personal hell, further strengthening the connection between the two. Nightmare Freddy's UCN voice lines also seem to indicate that they're linked. "I have always been hiding in your shadow" implies a further connection between the two, almost as if Nightmare Freddy is a dark reflection of William Afton. But anyway, he's the only one of the 4 original Nightmares that I think has any possible lore hints tied to him. Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare, however, as I said earlier, have a much bigger presence in the lore and more stuff to theorize about. It's a pretty common theory that Nightmare is a representation of death itself going after the Crying Child. But since we just established that the player character can't be the Crying Child, who is this? A pretty interesting theory posits that Nightmare's Crying Child's spirit trying to communicate to Michael, and that Nightmare Fredbear's Cassidy. This kinda requires the Golden Duo theory to be true, since that would explain why these spirits appear as variants of Fredbear or Golden Freddy. I think it's pretty likely the spirits inhabiting the FNAF 1 animatronics are entering Mike's dreams, similar to the FNAF movie. It also explains why Nightmare has a brain-like shape in his head. Even though it's almost definitely his endo head, it looks a lot like a brain and connects the character to Crying Child's death. Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare also appears as a duo in Ultimate Custom Night, so there's that too. However, the UCN voice lines don't really connect that strongly to these characters, so who knows, maybe it's not true. Plushtrap is a pretty interesting character. His FNAF 4 room is also linked to the sister location Bunker via the Breaker Room map, being directly connected to Ballora Gallery. But here's the thing, on that same map are a series of square dots in each of the rooms next to Plushtrap. Across the rest of said map, these dots represent different animatronics, such as Fredbear and Spring Bonnie in the diner, Nightmares in the bedroom, and so on. So, does this mean there are 5 Plushtraps? Not really. In the Help Wanted version of the Plushtrap minigame, we can find a rare Easter egg that shows 4 mini-arenas poking out of the exact rooms the dots are on. Remember that this minigame room is connected to Ballora Gallery, the home of Ballora and her mini-arenas. This is super interesting and is further evidence to the idea that Afton had these nightmare chambers connected to his bunker. Now I want to talk about the Halloween Edition characters, because they're probably some of the weirdest FNAF characters when it comes to canonicity. When the Halloween edition of FNAF 4 came out in 2015, Scott was, for once, very quick to announce the canonicity of the expansion. It was not canon in the slightest, and neither were any of the characters. However, this changed pretty quickly with the release of Ultimate Custom Night and fairly shortly after, Help Wanted. In both of these games, the Halloween Edition characters were present, with Jacko Chica, Nightmare Mangle, Nightmarion, and Nightmare Balloon Boy being present in Ultimate Custom Night, and both Jacko Bonnie and Chica being included in Help Wanted alongside Nightmarion. So if these characters are non-canon, what are they doing in these games? Well, we know the first 6 FNAF games exist as in-universe video games made by Fazbear Entertainment. They're not the exact same as our versions of the games, but they're pretty similar. So if the indie dev that made FNAFs 1 to 4 was in the process of making a Halloween edition, it makes sense that Fazbear Entertainment would reuse those characters for their VR game. The same explanation can be used for the presence of the other nightmares as action figures in the game. As to the reason these characters are in Ultimate Custom Night, it falls down to 2 options. 1, Scott wanted to give them more representation in the games and put them in UCN, or 2, these Halloween edition characters were the illusions one of the kids Afton planted in his bunker were having. Remember that it's likely these monsters look different for every single kid Afton put in his experiments, since the illusion gas messed with your mind and didn't have a set form that it gave to the objects it influenced. However, there's one Halloween edition character that became a huge part of the modern lore that's confused a lot of theorists, Nightmarion. In Security Breach, you can find a bunch of Nightmarion plushies and staff bots with Nightmarion face paint scattered across the Pizzaplex, as well as black and white puppet-like wires. I think this Nightmarion imagery is another branch of the mimic or glitch trap code infecting the Pizzaplex, rather than the return of Charlotte Emily or anything like that, because William has a strong connection to his nightmarish creations and Nightmarion is all over Help Wanted, meaning the mimic code in glitch trap could take on the form of said animatronic while taking over the programming of the Pizzaplex building. It's also possible this is the game's version of the storyteller from the books. It's also worth bringing up that it's weird how Nightmare BB and Nightmare Mangle are in FNAF 4 when the whole game contains nightmare versions of characters that existed around 1983, with BB and Mangle being from 1987. While this can be chalked down to the expansion being non-canon, I think it's much more likely these particular creatures are created from Mike's memories of his neighborhood, with the mangled Foxy toy in his sister Elizabeth's bedroom becoming Nightmare Mangle, and the boy with a balloon outside possibly becoming Nightmare Balloon Boy. But maybe I'm overthinking it, I don't know. So basically, the Nightmare animatronics are pretty interesting lore-wise, and some of them hide pretty cool lore and implications, like Nightmare Freddy, Plushtrap, Nightmare Fredbear, and so on. They're essentially created by these illusion gas-filled chambers and later become deeply connected to Michael Afton, constantly appearing in his dreams. They're pretty cool characters that have a surprising amount of relevance even later on in the franchise, as seen in Help Wanted and Curse of Dreadbear. With speculation out of the way, I'll ask the same question I asked at the end of my Phantoms video. What is my favorite out of the animatronics we discussed today? My favorite animatronic from the base game of FNAF 4 is probably Nightmare Bonnie or Nightmare Foxy. They both have really cool designs and are criminally underrated. As for the Halloween edition, I've gotta go with my boy Nightmarion. He kinda looks goofy, but he's got a great design overall, great voice lines in Ultimate Custom Night, and larger lore significance as I just discussed. Great character and definitely in my top 10 of the franchise. And with that, that's about all I have to say about the Nightmares. Thanks for watching. This video is similar to my previous one on the Phantoms because I wanted to tackle the Nightmares too, since they're some of my favorite animatronics in the series and have a surprising amount of lore behind them. This theory is a bit different from my previous one on the Vengeful Spirit. I wanted to make something a bit more chill. If you enjoyed, remember to like and subscribe, keep on theorizing, and never stop overthinking.